Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is a continuation of Senate corporations, and we're just going down our list. Recall this morning, we got through most of these, luckily. I think we're at the point where we're on House Bill 228, prohibition on private funds for conducting elections. I'm not seeing anybody in the audience, but Senator Steinmetz, you're a co-sponsor. Do you want to tell us about the bill?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So this bill is just a bill to prohibit government officials and election officials from accepting private funds. It's really they nicknamed it the Zuck Bucks bill because of things that have happened across the country. When our good Ed Buchanan, the Honorable Ed Buchanan, was our Secretary of State. He had asked me to run this when he was in office as the Secretary of State, so I ran it a couple times, but the Senate really never took it up. So here it is again. Basically it just says that nobody can accept gifts. Our county clerks, or they can't solicit, accept, or use or dispose of any donation in the form of money, grants, property, or personal services from an individual or non-governmental entity for the purpose of any type of expenses related to election administration, including but not limited to voter education, voter outreach, or voter registration programs. So it's just basically the elections, all costs and expenses relating to the elections need to be paid with public funds. And then we put this in, and Senator Scott was a part of this. It shall not apply to meals or food provided or donated to the support of election training, because they had some election training they did where people brought in food for them, and also election judges and poll workers. A lot of times you can't leave the facility, and a lot of times some good community members bring in some food for us when we're election judging. And so that's pretty much the gist of the bill. And it's just a prohibition on the private funds and grants from influencing our elections.
Okay. Any questions for Senator Steinmetz? Any questions? Mr. Secretary, did you want to address this bill? It's the House Bill 228.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Appreciate the continued work on these bills. Stand in support of House Bill 228, prohibiting private funds for conducting elections. This bill is substantially similar to House Bill 47 from the 24th session, and also a number of bills that Senator Steinmetz brought across the year. She's done great work on it, and I'm so excited that we're getting closer to the finish line on Wyoming joining the 27 states that have banned the third-party funding of elections, often colloquially called Zuck Bucks. In recent years, there has been an increasing and nationwide concern when it comes to private groups funding election administration. This began with private groups funneling over $400 million to election offices in 47 states, citing COVID-19. However, many of these grants went toward massive electioneering efforts, which had nothing to do with COVID-19. Many grants contain the divulgence of election operations, and large discrepancies remain with where funds actually went. This continued into subsequent elections, with many more millions being funneled to election offices around the country to fund election administration, making many grants contingent on quote-unquote best practices and improvement plans to change election administration. These funding models are becoming quite complex and have targeted nearby states like Utah. The source of funding for these new efforts range and include potentially foreign actors who, as foreign nationals, are otherwise prohibited from donating to elections, by creating a conduit whereby the organizations they control pump hundreds of millions of dollars to advance a partisan agenda and fund these groups seeking to influence election administrations. In response, 28 states, there's another one that just joined the pack, have banned or restricted private funding of elections, and many have repudiated private funding of election administration. Given the tactics used by these groups, I have sent numerous letters to the county clerks warning them of Wyoming's vulnerability as one of a minority of states with no ban on private funding of elections, and have urged them not to engage with any of these groups. Now, although the media has tried to say, as they often do, that, quote, this doesn't happen in Wyoming, I was deeply disturbed that the Center for Tech and Civic Life, one of the main private organizations causing concern about the private funding of election administration across the country, were at the Wyoming Association of County Officers meeting in Rock Springs on September 25th, 2024. While I again asked our county clerks not to engage with these groups and understand that they may have not understood when they reached out to Lisa Booth at the CCAW meeting, what the background on this group, I do believe that it is shown that there is an issue here. We need to take action on this and ban this third-party interference with elections. Now, this bill before you does differ a little bit in substance from House Bill 47 from 2023, in that House Bill 47 only created a prohibition on the solicitation or acceptance of private funds, but no real means by which to prohibit the offering to give or giving of private funds by these groups that are causing concern. So this bill does account for that to make it so that the offering to give or giving, rather than just receiving or soliciting, is a violation. And that was a great suggestion made by Senator Barlow in the 24 August meeting in Douglas of the Joint Corporations Committee that we tried to incorporate into the 2024 version in early, the 2023 version in early 24. And unfortunately, that bill was tabled in that 24 budget session. And this language is now found in subsection B of this bill draft. And I think this bill draft and this idea is well vetted, considered, and something that Wyoming should join the 28 states that have banned the private funding of conducting elections. So we support House Bill 228. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions for the Secretary? Any questions? We're good. I see the sponsors here. Let's give them a
Yes.
shot at this. Representative Knack. Senator Steinmetz did go through the bill. I think she did a great job. But if you have anything you might want to add. We just went ahead because it's been a long day and we really want to get out of here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Apologize for being late. Was trying to keep an eye on you adjourning over there, but missed it. So as we were announcing committee assignments. So yes, this bill, some people ask, how does it affect us in Wyoming, right? That's one of the questions that's always asked. And I would say Wyoming is particularly vulnerable in the fact that we have private money here, and we have a low population. And so any money that's put towards this type of activity greatly affects and weights the population. So one thing that was found in 2020 with the Zuckerberg dollars, about 400 million went into funding, and the weighted areas like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Georgia was about 3-to-1 in funding in Democratic areas. So funding tends to weight turnout and weight special interests. So that's the three things that this prevents: is corruption, limits special interests, and it helps to not disenfranchise the voter. So with that, I would take any questions on the bill.
Okay, questions for Representative Knapp? Any questions? I think we're good. Who else in the audience would like to address the committee? Clerks are declining. Ms. Simmons, Representative Lucas, Ms. Russell, who would like to address? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Russell, Wyoming Republican Party Executive Director. As with the other election bills that you have heard this session, we are definitely in favor of this. There's been numerous stories and documentaries and memos and all sorts of things that have come out about the undue influence of outside dollars in contributing to these election systems. And so we would stand in favor of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Any questions for Ms. Russell? Thank you. And sir, I should remember your name, but I don't. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brian Shuck. I'm the attorney for the Wyoming Republican Party.
Go ahead, Mr. Shuck.
So a couple of things I thought briefly were worth mentioning is one, We had David Bossie out here in November of last year to preview his movie on this particular topic. And he has documented exhaustively what happened with Zuckerberg and how much money he poured into the 2020 election. I'd encourage you to watch that when you have time. It's excellent. So if anyone is suggesting that this has not happened in Wyoming and it's not a problem, you don't have to wait for something to be a problem before you fix it and cut it off. I understand from those who were at the County Clerks Association meeting here earlier last year that the group that some of this money was funneled through had a booth at their meeting. So they may not be active here in Wyoming yet, but they want to be. So this is a very important bill. It's at the top of the list of Wyoming GOP's priorities, and I would encourage you to pass it.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Shuck? Thank you, sir. Anybody else wish to testify? Is there anybody online that wishes to testify?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Jackie Doyle.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's have that. Let's go ahead. Ms. Dwyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jackie Doyer. I am the Legal Policy Director of Honest Elections Project Action. We are a nonprofit group. We are a national group that fights for the right of every American to vote in free and fair elections.
Are you in Washington, D.C.?
No, sir, I'm in Texas.
Texas. Thank you.
This is a common sense measure to protect against the corrosive influence of private election financing schemes in Wyoming. You've heard how in 2020, left-wing nonprofits led by the Center for Tech and Civic Life pumped more than $400 million into election offices under the guise of COVID-19 relief grants. Research has shown that less than 1% of those funds were spent on PPE or other measures to implement safety protocols. 92% of those funds actually went to left-leaning districts. But since 2020, 28 states have passed bans similar to House Bill 228 against this private funding scheme. Many states did so on a bipartisan basis, recognizing the dangers of private influence in our elections. Unfortunately, the attempt to influence elections through private financing has not stopped. It's simply merged into a different form. After the 2020 election, CTCL announced a new program designed to evade even the bans that states have put into place. It's an $80 million initiative that is run by the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence, which is a constellation of partisan organizations that are able to quietly influence election administration, even where private financing has been banned. Our sister organization, Honest Elections Project, has done extensive research into the alliance, and essentially it is a program that enables backers to push politics directly into election administration. More recently, they've announced a program targeting rural election officers, and the threat of private interests is still alive and real. A significantly concerning aspect of these private funding schemes is the risk for providing a conduit for foreign influence into election administration. Hans-Jörg Wyss, a Swiss billionaire, has poured nearly $500 million into left-wing causes. Since 2016, he has invested significant sums into New Venture Fund, which is a grant-making entity managed by Arabella Advisors. They oversee a vast dark money network that routinely brings in more than $1 billion annually. In 2020, that fund gave $25 million to CTCL. Two of their partners, the Center for Secure and Modern Elections and the Institute for Responsive Government, are also projects of the New Venture Fund. In other words, groups like CTCL and the Alliance are an avenue for both improper partisan influence and potential foreign influence over election administration. While Wyoming did not receive any grants in 2020, they are definitely not immune from this threat. Just last year, Secretary Gray expressed his concerns over CTCL attending the Wyoming Association of County Officers meeting in Rock Springs. This, coupled with that new rural program that the Alliance has announced, puts Wyoming in a particularly vulnerable position. This bill will provide an outright ban and guard against those dangers of private funding in elections. I applaud the committee for bringing this to Wyoming's attention, and I urge you to move this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Doyle? Doyer, I'm sorry, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Anybody else online? No, Mr. Chairman. We had one person come in the back of the room. Anybody wish to testify on this bill? Nope. Nobody. That's the extent of the public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Motion by Steinmetz, discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Ready for the question? Please call the question. Call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 228, Prohibition on Private Funds for Conducting Elections. Senator Boner,
He's excused.
Senator Dockstetter. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Case.
Aye.
You have 4 ayes and 1 excused.
So looking, Senator Steinmetz, you're the only one on this white copy, so you'll carry it on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to carry it on the floor.
You got it. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 318 engrossed, maintenance of voter lists. Representative Lucas, this is your bill. Thanks, Representative Knapp. Mr. Chairman, appreciate it very much. Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, committee. What a pleasure it is to be here. I appreciate
Is
the
your mic on?
opportunity.
I'm just,
It is. Well, it's green.
Yeah.
Oh, do I need to lean in?
I think sometimes they get tired at the end of the day, or our ears get tired.
Maybe
Please
I'm
do.
tired.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this bill to you. It is my first time.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah. So this is House Bill 318, Maintenance of Voter Lists. The bill itself is not a complex one, and the changes to it are not complex. But I want to run you through a little bit of it, if you don't mind.
Okay.
This is verifying voter registration data, is really what it comes down to. The Secretary of State is authorized to verify voter registration data by matching it with driver's license information. And the Secretary of State's office uses the SAVE, Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements program, to verify U.S. citizenship of voters. And they get periodic reporting, monthly reporting. This bill will allow them to get a little bit more information from the Department of Transportation and other states. I'd point your attention to page 2, where we have some changes, looking at line 10 and going through to line 21, just going through some of the changes. Most notably, they're adding in the ability to get information not just from other states, but not limited to that information. And I know that they're going to do a better job of explaining all of this than I will for you. But this isn't a far stretch from the information that we're getting currently. It just kind of tightens it up a little bit. This will enhance our voter registration accuracy. By using this enhanced data and the SAVE Act, it aims to really ensure that only U.S. citizens are registered to vote in Wyoming. It is confidential and secure, and it will aid us in making our voter list maintenance even more secure and efficient. Really wasn't a lot of amendments other than that one. Oh, yep, there are. Let's look at the next page, page 3. So the Secretary of State can use the SAVE Act. The Secretary of State then has the ability also to use information furnished by the Wyoming Department of Transportation and to transmit any information that they feel applicable to county clerks. And then if we look at the bottom of page 3 and over into page 4, county clerks have the ability then under this to decide if they feel the need to cancel a voter's registration based on information that that voter is not a US citizen. They have a time limit to do this and so on. And basically, that's about it. I would stand for questions.
Okay, I'm just gonna go online here for a second. I'm trying to get a handle on all of the House amendments. Just give me 1 second. Senator Steinmetz.
If I could, I just wanted to
Go
give a
ahead.
pointer to some of our House folks. I think this is the second or maybe third bill we've had come over without a Senate sponsor on it, and I would sure like to see a Senate sponsor on your bills from now on.
Well, you know, we kind of understand we're kind of hard to get along with.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Lucas.
Chairman. Senator Steinmetz, I would have loved to have asked any of you to co-sponsor this, but this bill was actually registered like right before deadline, and the time just wasn't available. I apologize.
Representative Lucas,
Sir,
as I look, the standing committee was the only amendment adopted in the House, and it went to page 2, line 16 of the white version. So it's in that first, under Romanet I.
yes,
Yeah, and it just goes in there and it adds other states, including but not limited to information received from. So that language, it was line 16. Yeah. If you look on line 16, the words other states, including but not limited to information received from, is the extent of the House changes to this bill.
that is correct,
I
sir.
got that right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, questions for Representative Lucas? Any questions? Anybody? Thank you, Representative Lucas. We'll hear other testimonies.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Mr. Secretary, stay close, Will. Might need you. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my right is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director and our General Counsel. 318 is a really important piece of legislation in codifying best practices for voter list maintenance, catching up the state of Wyoming in some of these practices that other states have really kind of gone ahead of us on. And so, you know, this is really a kind of a belt and suspender bill, a really, nitty gritty a bill in terms of best practices. So I'm going to lean on Mr. Rubino as well. He's very good on this stuff. So I'm, might turn it over to him at your indulgence at a couple moments in time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then also, I want to be clear, YDOT's here and Driver Services and, we've worked with them a lot on this because there's a lot of interaction, and I've really enjoyed working with Mr. Rossetti and Ms. Dobson on these issues. We've built a really good relationship, and we've also collaborated on this bill as well. And I believe this will add another tool to our tool belt to strengthen voter list maintenance procedures by accomplishing three things. One, codifying an existing statute, our ability to obtain certain records from the Wyoming Department of Transportation to verify eligibility to vote. Two, enabling us to leverage our relationship with WYDOT to obtain new information pertaining to voter registrations. And three, enabling us a new avenue to obtain data that will allow us to analyze and communicate to the clerks if a registered voter in the state of Wyoming should have their registration canceled for having moved to another state. And this is a huge priority of our administration. It's voter list maintenance. It's sometimes called voter list hygiene. I like that word, thinking about brushing your teeth, you keep good hygiene for your voter rolls. And I want to highlight a few key provisions of the bill and its relation to our office as well as constituent agencies. First, on page 1 and really moving on to page 2, amending 22-3-102E Romanet I pertaining to our office's agreement to match voter registration data. The amendment to Romanet I does two things. First, it provides statutory authority to obtain alien identification numbers held by the Wyoming Department of Transportation, which we will then be able to cross-reference with the Wyoming voter registration list to determine any individuals who should be canceled by virtue of non-citizen status. Second, the amendment gives our office explicit authority to obtain information obtained by the Wyoming Department of Transportation that they receive from other states when any voter on the voter registration list has obtained a driver's license from another state, thereby indicating the individual may have moved out of this state. And this state-to-state verification service operated by the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, it's really one of the gold standards in helping to understand whether someone has moved out of state, because of course if someone requests a license in another state, that's a pretty big indication someone has moved out of state. So it's an important piece of information to have. And beginning on page 2, line 16, it was discussed that while Wyoming, through its participation in the state-to-state verification service, obtains this data from other states, it may be better to broaden the reach, allowing other means to obtain this data. That was worked into the bill. So what you'll see in the engrossed version is the language of our proposed amendment that after received from, that it says other states, including but not limited to information received from. And that was adopted on the House side in the House discussion. So that's really kind of the first, it kind of has two concepts in there. That's the First Amendment to existing statute. Now we move on to page 3, the amendment to 22-3-102E, Romanet 6, providing statutory authority to the Secretary of State to utilize information from the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements called SAVE program to verify any voters listed on the Wyoming voter registration system, verifying that they are United States citizens. This SAVE system is very hot in terms of voter list maintenance, somewhat cutting edge, although a lot of states are doing it, and we really want that explicit statutory authority so that we can apply. And we just sent a letter to the new administration to Secretary Noem. Homeland Security manages this system on some best practices that other states have seen in utilizing the SAVE Act. It's just really important that we get this into the code and codify it. Third, the bill amends subsection F on the middle of page 3. This codifies existing practice of data. WYDOT is giving our office to obtain information from WYDOT, a list of persons who, although they appear on the statewide voter rolls, they've indicated to WYDOT that they are a non-citizen. And so that we would like to codify. I always talk to our staff. I'm not going to be here forever. I'm a moment in time. And we never know what's going to happen to anybody. So we want to get this into statute so that we get this practice. We really get this into statute and move it forward because it's best practice. Finally, tying this all together, this enables our office to notify counties of an ability to cancel registration of an individual on the statewide voter registration system should any of the data we've received in any other investigation reveal that their registration should be canceled. Mr. Chairman, the cancellation still does remain with the county clerks. I want to be clear on that. It was not changed with this bill. That is the code. We've always communicated with them when we feel somebody should be canceled, and they take action or they don't, depending on the situation. But the state manages the voter registration system, and that's why it's important that we get this into state statute, and that goes back to HAVA.
Mr. Secretary, I might have misheard you, but when you were talking about F on page 3, I read this, it's the WYDOT has to furnish a list of what information they have about non-citizen status. But you mentioned that they were on the voting list. They shouldn't be on the voting list, right? Or did I get that wrong? I thought you said something about that.
Mr. Chairman, they certainly should not be on the voting list.
Agreed.
But if they falsely attest, this is a problem with attestations, certainly possible. We have had a case of that in 2020, a person that voted that we identified and communicated to the Campbell County Clerk based on information we uncovered. And I hope that these best practices will identify, will be good for voter list maintenance. But yes, they should not be on the list, but if they are, we can cross-check and proceed.
Gotcha. I think I misheard you. Any questions for Mr. Secretary? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in F, you're saying this is already existing practice, but monthly seems a little, I mean, could you explain monthly? It's on page 3, line 9, that the Department of Transportation shall furnish monthly. And, you know, we're not having elections at that frequency, so I was just wondering why you chose monthly, just for my own information.
Yeah.
Mr. Secretary.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I love that voter list hygiene word, because just like you keep good oral hygiene daily, you keep good voter list hygiene daily even. And it's a continuing process. This is really a list that YDOT already has, because it's people that have indicated that they have that non-citizen status. We worked with Mr. Rossetti on this, didn't indicate that he viewed this as a burden. They're really top-notch over there at YDOT on this area. And they didn't indicate any concern on that. Don't want to speak for him, though. I know he's here, so, and I think is going to testify on the bill, I assume.
Okay, anybody else?
Anything to add there?
Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Secretary, I found myself wondering, the original language in Romanet I really gives you everything below, right?
Mr. Secretary.
And I've heard you say codify a couple of times. Is that all just for future generations to know how you guys handled it? Or is there room under rules to modify, or are we always going to have to go into these statutes and change them as we go? That's my concern. If we codify all this, any change you make, we're going to have to go to the green books, right?
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, there's always a balance here, okay? And it's always fascinating, because when I try to do something that I think is in sort of the duties of this office, it seems like the media makes a big stink about it. I don't want in any way to say that I don't have the current authority to do this. But I think I do. And there's some stuff we're doing in existing practice, but there's some we're not. State-to-state verification service is one we're not. And for purposes of YDOT's compliance with this American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, I think that's part of it. I mean, for them to share this with us, I think they want to have that statutory meat there, because they're a member of this and they're sharing that with us. The SAVE system, when you enter that, they want a statutory authority there. The feds want that. And so there's a balance here. I think we struck it with this. There was more I was thinking of putting in here, but it could go on forever. But I think we kept it to 4 concepts in 3 different paragraphs, right? And 3 different sections of the code, and then the investigation thing, which is kind of a separate issue, but that related. It's a single subject. But so I think we struck the balance here on I do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We're going to hear from YDOT, see what they think about that. Anybody else have anything for the Secretary? Thank you. I don't know whether to go to YDOT first or the clerks first, but let's go to, clerks are waving us off. Come on, Mr. Rossetti. Welcome. You're getting overtime today. You can tell the guy in the cowboy hat, you deserve that big bonus.
We'd be doing more fun things if we weren't here.
Mr. Rossetti, welcome, and tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Taylor Rossetti, Deputy Director at YDOT. I think the Secretary did a really good job covering kind of where we landed on this bill. I think a lot of the things that you guys mentioned were kind of where we started with this too, was we weren't really sure that, well, is this really necessary? But I do believe as we talked through this and we talked with the Secretary and his staff, a lot of what we do right now is really kind of gentleman's agreement type stuff. It's completely permissible. There's nothing untoward about what's being shared. It's mostly been an agreement between the 2 departments. I think what this does do is it lays out the foundation for why we're doing it. And I think it makes it very clear that it's permissive and it's the direction of this body that they would like us to continue to do so. So we landed on this bill and felt pretty comfortable with it. A little bit of background on that amendment there on page 2, lines 16 and 17. The reason that we proposed that and worked with the Secretary to try to get that in there is at the end of line 17, that reference to the state-to-state verification service, State-to-state verification service is actually like almost a brand name, right? Like that's the current system. And I think by adding this other language, our hope was is if that system changes or is updated and it's a different name, it's clear that, okay, the successor to state is also open for this. So we thought that that was a pretty good add, and it should last for quite some time to the future. More states are coming on all the time. We should actually get to full 50 states here fairly quickly. So that information then would be shared across all the states. And if that system's called something different, we don't have to come back to you guys and have you change that in the statute.
Crystal clear on that.
Moving then on to the language there on page 3, lines 1 through 6. I think the secretary nailed that as well. This gives him clear authority to use that system. We already have clear authority in other places, so we can use it. Now it allows them to use it. So then it seems pretty logical that for legal purposes, we can share that information. Seems like a pretty good add as well. And then I think getting into F, the questions about that, this is really what we're doing now, and we are doing that on a monthly basis now, and it's mostly because it's an add file. So we just add the new stuff that happens every month versus trying to update it. You know, we could do it nightly, but monthly is a pretty good chunk. They then can go through and process what they need to process. It's pretty much in line with what we're doing now. And with that, I'd certainly stand for any questions you guys may have of me.
Thank you, Mr. Rossetti. Any questions for Mr. Rossetti? Anybody? I think you nailed it. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr.
guys.
Rossetti. Anybody else in the audience wish to testify on this bill? Anybody online? Ms. Russell, are you coming up? You're welcome to. It's going to be okay. The bill's going to be fine. You're welcome to. Go ahead, Ms. Russell.
Mr. Chairman, Kathy Russell, Wyoming Republican Party Executive Director. This bill actually addresses a couple of concerns that we have had as a party over a number of years. One of them is that state-to-state cooperation. That answers some of the issues that we've had. The other issue is some of the numbers that have been heard is 35 million immigrants into the United States in 10 years. That is not insignificant. That is significant. We cannot assume that those folks are not here. We cannot verify without things like this. We can't verify whether or not they are qualified and legitimate to register and vote. And so we would stand in favor of this bill.
Thank you. Any
Thank you.
questions from Ms. Russell? Thank you, Ms. Russell. Anybody online? I think we've exhausted the ones here. Okay. Committee, I think we've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Motion by Steinmetz. And Senator Boner, we're working on House Bill 318. Any discussion, any amendments? Pretty clear? Okay, I appreciated the testimony and appreciated the Department of Transportation weighing in. Anything else? How about if we call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 318, Maintenance of Voter Lists. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Case.
Aye.
You have 5 ayes.
Okay.
No amendments.
And Senator, we don't have a Senate sponsor. Maybe would one of the persons on this committee be willing to take the bill? Senator Steinmetz wants to do it? Is that okay with you, Representative Lucas? Okay, and we'll help. So let's put Steinmetz down on that one. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 337, prohibiting foreign funding of ballot measures. Representative Weber is here, and we're going to hear from her. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Case and senators of the committee. Get these on so I can read. So I can walk through this page by page. I'd also ask that the Secretary of State come up to help with the walkthrough of the page by page. But essentially what House Bill 337 does is it requires disclosures to be made to the Secretary of State so that groups who are associated or raising, collecting, or spending money to support or oppose legislation which is the subject of a statewide ballot initiative or referendum to disclose to the Secretary of State that they have not received funding from a foreign national. Prohibiting foreign nationals from influencing the initiative process is a growing concern around the country. In a lot of ways, this bill just makes sense in Wyoming. We don't want foreign actors, such as China, to be meddling in our lawmaking process. And what we are seeing in other states is that foreign actors are getting involved in the initiative process as a way to influence legislation. Needless to say, I don't think we want that here. And so this bill is a proactive measure to set up these safeguards. To various degrees, California, Colorado, Maryland, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, and Washington have already prohibited foreign money in ballot initiatives. In response to many millions of dollars being poured into the initiative process by foreign donors to reduce penalties for fentanyl possession and initiatives codifying radical abortion laws in Ohio in 22-24, the Ohio legislature began putting safeguards to prohibit foreign money in ballot initiative process. And there might be some groups saying this isn't a Wyoming problem. But I think with what we've seen in the context of prohibiting zuck bucks, Wyoming needs to take a proactive measure before we get left behind. I think this bill makes a step towards enacting some of these important safeguards in Wyoming to require that groups that are organized to support or oppose legislation that is the subject of the ballot initiative process must affirmatively state that the group is not funded by foreign nationals. So, Mr. Chairman, would you like me to walk through the bill, or would you
Please
like
do,
to
yeah.
have questions?
And you're welcome to phone your friend there too.
Okay, I'm phoning Chuck right now to come right on up here and,
Mr. Chair, you're okay with this, right?
yes.
Yeah, I'm happy. If you guys want to tag team it, that
Yes,
sounds great.
Yes, we do.
All right.
Okay. You
Always
wanna-
a permission from the chairman, but thank you. Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah,
You guys work it out.
Representative Weber's done a great job on this. Appreciate it.
Okay. I'll let you start.
Okay. Well, first, we sort of have these definitions on page 2. And, this is one of those where the windup comes first. I like them when the windup comes first on these bills rather than the pitch first. And we have foreign national, which sort of cross-references the code, prohibited source, contributions from or expenditures by a foreign national directly or indirectly means acting either alone or jointly with, through or on behalf of any other committee, organization, person, or entity. And here in subsection B, we have that no foreign national shall direct, control, or otherwise directly or indirectly participate in the decision-making of any group that is required to file with the Secretary of State. And here again in subsection C, that the certification is there, that they're going to have to file certification regarding funding from prohibited sources as provided in this paragraph. In the certification, they then lay out everything that's going to be there, that no expenditure of the group was knowingly, whether directly or indirectly, funded by a prohibited source, that the group shall not knowingly, whether directly or indirectly, receive, solicit, or accept contributions or expenditures from a prohibited source. And again, we have that definition in the windup on page 2, and that the group will keep records of contributions and expenditures for a period of not less than 5 years. And then in subsection D, we have this requirement that before accepting contributions, the group shall obtain affirmation from the donor that the donor is not a foreign national, and the donor is not knowingly accepted, whether directly or indirectly, more than $100,000 in aggregate from prohibited sources in the immediately preceding 4-year period. So it's trying to strike a balance here on that 100,000 limit. I'd like it to be lower, but that is the course that the states that have this have gone. Then E provides this ability to bring a civil action to enforce the provisions of this section. And again, really, since we're keying on statewide initiatives or referendum, it lies with the state the ability to bring that civil action. And my testimony itself will bring this out a little more. What we're trying to do is close the loophole in federal law that allows this foreign funding of initiatives and referendums. This has been a big issue in other states, Michigan in particular. Very confident with the results in November that this loophole hopefully will be closed at the federal level, but if it's not, we're trying to close it at the state level, and we should close it anyway at the state level to make it clear for purposes of state referendums and initiatives. And then 22-25-116 is ballot measures, whereas 202, which we just went through, is influencing statewide ballot measures. This is the prohibition for those influencing ballot measures. And is used in this section, again, we have these three definitions. And then in B, the pitch on 116, that no foreign national shall direct, control, or otherwise directly or indirectly participate in the decision-making of any political action committee or organization supporting or opposing any statewide initiative or referendum, petition, drive. So again, 202 is group under statute, group of persons, which is in statute, it's an entity. 116 is political action committees. And then C is the reporting mechanism that is sort of modeled after 202. And then again, on page 6, you have the three certifications that they make, the three elements of the certification. And then D is this affirmation from the donor. And then an E on page 7 is the ability to bring a civil action to enforce the provisions of this code. So 202 again is groups for statewide referendum and initiatives, and 116 are the PACs. And then you have the enacting date. So again, this is trying to close this loophole on foreign funding, to stop the foreign funding of ballot measures with groups and PACs. And I'll talk a little more about that in my testimony.
Okay. Questions at this point? For either the representative or the secretary? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I did not have an opportunity to get to this today. We've had kind of a busy day. The foreign national definition. Can you
Page 2?
on page 2?
Okay.
Mr. Secretary, is that anybody from out of state, or is it only people from out of country?
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Yes, it's out of country and it cross-references the US code on that. So it's not like business registrations, anything not in Wyoming is foreign. It's anybody out of country.
Anybody else? Senator Landon.
And a quick follow-up, if someone, this would prohibit a person who lives here but has not gotten citizenship, for example. We actually have a couple there in your hometown where I live who is from another country, but they wouldn't qualify. Now, they just both got citizenship last year.
So,
But prior to that, they would not have qualified and been able to contribute to anything. Is that correct?
Mr. Secretary, let me help me with this. So I looked this up, this USC 3121B, and it actually prohibits foreign nationals directly or indirectly to contribute to any federal, state, or local election. So it already has these lists of prohibitions that foreign nationals can't do. And then, as I understand, as we come around, and I think a foreign national is defined it just says the foreign national shall not include any individual who's a citizen of the United States and an individual who is not a citizen of the United States or a national of the United States and who is not lawfully admitted to permanent residence as defined by another section. So it sounds like a foreign national a permanent resident is not a foreign national. I'm just pointing that out. That's what I think this definition says. And I'll throw that back to you, Mr. Secretary. It sounds like this bill closes that loophole you were talking about with respect to initiatives and referendums. But it does seem to allow permanent residents to make, by the federal definition, Can you help me with that? And I'm sorry, Senator Landon, it went a little
No,
farther than I planned.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. It's a long day, and I appreciate any help I can get at this time of night.
Well,
Back to you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I need to examine that question a little more on the permanent resident.
Okay.
I know there's some folks that have worked on this in other states that I think are going to testify in closing this loophole. There's a lot of people passionate about this, but I think you cross-referencing the federal statute, you see where we're going with this. We're trying to close this loophole on ballot measures and initiatives, which has been exploited in other states. I'm not saying it's been exploited here. And we're leaving the definition where it is at the federal level. Happy to look at that some more, but we decided to, keep the federal definition, not mess with that, because it is pretty clear on state, local, and federal races, but just close this loophole in relation to the ballot measures and initiatives.
Yeah, and the prohibitions in the existing law are a contribution or donation of money or any other thing of value, or to make an express or implied promise to make a contribution or donation in connection with a federal, state, or local election. That's in federal law. B, a contribution or donation to a committee of a political party. Or C, an expenditure, independent expenditure or disbursement for an electioneering communication within the meaning of section 30104F3 of this title. I don't know what that is, but electioneering communication at one time was in the Citizen United case, if you remember that. But I don't know if there's a connection. So those are prohibited now, but yet it seems to allow this exception for a permanent residence, that they're not a foreign national. Look, I've looked at it for 30 seconds, that's all I know, so. Anybody, Mr. Secretary?
Well, and Mr. Chairman, as you go through the bill, it cross-references, because it always says no foreign national, and that cross-references the definition in the code. So happy to look into that a little more, but we are retaining that federal definition and just trying to close the loophole.
So go with Senator
So,
Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just to finish up, we do have people who move here, and we have a couple right in our community who we've become friends with them. I just want to make sure that if they're living here, it kind of appears as though maybe they're not considered foreign nationals at that point. And if they wanted to help, a local campaign or help me as a friend in an election, I just want to be clear about that, because we've got to take this home. You got to take the vote home, so.
Yeah.
And the permanent residence thing is, they have to be admitted for permanent residence. So there's some process to do that. I don't know what it is, but there would be.
There's some federal requirement that they can live here.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
I really appreciate Senator Landon. There are people here that are here legally, that want to attain citizenship and believe in our country, but at the same time, there could be the opposite. And people with poor intent and that don't have loyalty. And I think at the federal level, we've made the call that we're going to have this explicit prohibition, in these instances, albeit within the definition, which I think you're right there. We need to continue to look at exactly what that definition is saying. I understand what you're saying, but I think that having foreign nationals contribute to these campaigns is concerning, because you can't just, how it goes, Senator Landon, you can't just say, well, somebody like the SOS or the clerk judges it case by case on what their intent is. I mean, you got to have either a bright line or you don't. And I think that that's the direction they've gone at the federal level, and I certainly support that, albeit they had this loophole that has been exploited. And so that's what we're trying to close in this bill.
Anybody else?
I do have one more.
Okay, go right ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, sorry, I don't mean to keep us late, but this is actual stuff on the ground. Our oil and gas industry, a lot of interaction with Canada, for example. and an individual contributed to one of my campaigns years ago. He is a dual citizen. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I don't think that would prohibit him from helping, in any of the races in Wyoming. His company, of course, was connected to Canada. We have a lot of folks in that industry that hang out in Campbell County and Natrona County.
So Senator Landon, I think it says, and the term foreign national shall not include an individual who is a citizen of the United States. So I think
Okay,
even if they're a
perfect.
dual citizen,
Okay.
you're still a citizen, and you're entitled to the protection of the United States. So I think anybody that's a dual citizen, and that's more common now, and would be okay. I have a hypothetical, if anybody wants to take me through it. Supposing you had an environmental group or some group that was advocating something in Wyoming. It could be an environmental group, and they don't get involved in politics that often, but that among their donors is someone that would be disqualified by this bill. And then the environmental group, and I'm not sure even why I'm doing that, but maybe they want a ballot measure like in-stream flow, for example. So they actively work towards a ballot measure for in-stream flow. Some of their funding comes from a foreign national, maybe not for the specific of influencing the ballot measure, but maybe for just a donation to their organization. How do we handle that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think that if it was over $100,000, it would be prohibited, and certainly understand your hypotheticals, but I think it's really important that we clean this up. And I would pose to you that I think a lot of people would be concerned by sort of that foreign influence, even if it's good intent. I think that the policy-wise, and look at the federal code, we've decided that we're gonna really lean towards keeping this domestic, so that we ensure we don't get folks that are not, results that are not in alignment with the best interests of our country. And so I'm just gonna be real with you. I think if it's over 100,000, it's gonna be prohibited, and that's kind of one of the functions of the bill, is to control that foreign influence.
I get it totally, and I'm not really being argumentative. I'm just trying to think about in administration, if you have, there could be a very large organization. We could pick an industry association, okay? And an industry association sponsors a ballot measure. But that's very large amounts of money that goes through the industry association. And maybe the money that's given to the industry association is not earmarked for the ballot measure. Maybe it has nothing to do with the ballot measure, but it funds the association, and then the association funds the ballot measure. How are we going to handle that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think if they chose that vehicle to fund the campaigns and didn't create a separate vehicle, that yes, it would have to be under $100,000. And I would pose to you that I think that is a good policy choice, that we don't want that foreign influence.
I'm not arguing the policy choice.
Yeah, in our elections. So I want to be real with you. I mean, there's a policy choice here, and I guess you could insert, you can't just pick and choose, you insert.
Yeah.
We don't want China, trying to use a pass-through through a industry group to fund a ballot initiative. We don't want really any, I don't want any foreign influence, really. But I think this bill tries to strike the balance. I mean, I'd like to go a little further, but I think it strikes a balance in light of some of the concerns that Senator Landon raised and you raised. I think that's why it does that, and other states have chosen to go that direction. I mean, you could just say zero. I mean, any $1, and then you're,
Sure.
that's why it has that $100,000 level.
The last big initiative that we had involving organizations was a very big one, and it was the triple trailers. At the same time, there was the coal slurry pipeline. Was that right? Do I have that right? I think, wait, it was the railroads versus, there were two big, huge industry groups dueling to fund an initiative, counter initiatives that were on the ballot. And my memory's kind of not the best on it, but the industries formed a political action committee to fund. And so, but, I mean, we can imagine industries, there are definitely industries that are part of associations that involve foreign companies, right? You know, in the trona industry and the petroleum industry, there are lots of foreign participation. Can they form political action committees and then can they participate if it were to come to that? Or do you think, no, the political action committee has to be clean of any money from the association then? Or help me, how we can administer this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it gets to, you know, you look at the subsection D, which is that the group is going to obtain affirmation from the donor that the donor is not a foreign national and that the donor has not knowingly accepted, whether directly or indirectly, more than $100,000 in aggregate from prohibited sources in the immediately preceding 4-year period. So, you know, they would have to affirm that they have not received that from a foreign national. And so I think that's looking at each individual. Now, if, you know, Tata created a PAC with American donations from their employees, that's a little bit of a different situation. But if they were going to take contributions from a foreign national, that would be subject to the provisions of the bill. And I would pose to you, I'll get more into this in my testimony, I think that's a good choice to make, and certainly one that they've made at the federal level in all the races except for this loophole on ballot measures and initiatives. Anything to add to that, Mr. Rubino?
Senator Land?
So I think I'm just going to bring up something which is what we like to do, and I think we should do on, you know, legislation to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences. I can see where an animal initiative could be very real, and it could come in, let me use an example that we've dealt with in this session. If we end up not doing anything about predators, for example, and how we hunt them, and we get a bunch of folks signing enough lists that we have to put that on some, you know, some ballot or whatever. I could see where these animal groups, I mean, we get emails from all over the world on animal stuff. Save the animals, the Nature Conservancy. I don't mean to pick on any, but I could give you a list of 10 that the TRW committee deals with. So any concerns there? I mean, it seems like those organizations which are domiciled in our state, they're gonna have to be they probably won't be able to contribute, right?
Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think you're hitting at one of the reasons why this bill is important. I remember when I was a legislator, I still get them on the case that just happened, although less so. But sometimes they'll bring in the executive branch in on them, you know, the emails from France and Germany on these different things. And, you know, and I think you're getting to why we're concerned. We're sitting here and we have this loophole in federal law that I think many groups abroad are aware of. They've exploited it in Michigan and Ohio. And if we don't close it, yeah, they could create these entities for purposes of initiatives and referendum and with $4. And thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Secretary.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I think the language is pretty broad. If you look under the PAC on page 5, no foreign national shall direct, control. They probably don't do that in the examples we provided. But otherwise directly or indirectly participate in the decision-making of any political action committee or organization supporting or opposing any statewide initiative or referendum petition drive. So they can't even be part of the organization is what this would seem to prohibit. So the organization, if it wanted to participate, the individual members would have to lend their support to the issue cutting out the foreign national to be able to exercise their free speech. I think that's what it does.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and again, that 100,000 is, they're asserting that they haven't been a pass-through for a foreign national up to 100,000, and that they're not receiving donations from foreign nationals.
Great. Tell you what, we've kind of probably, I know you still want to give testimony, so I don't mean, we probably went down, we'd yield to you for direct testimony if you wanted.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just so I'm explicit, because we went through the bill, I would like to give some testimony. Stand in support of the bill. This might be a little bit repetitive. Support House Bill 337. I think the key here is that the people of Wyoming are afforded the right to propose and enact law by the initiative process, and that's in the Constitution. And we've seen now initiatives move forward, or one initiative move forward that will be on the ballot in 2026. But that right is not afforded to foreign nationals, and it's very clear in our Constitution. I think requiring that group, the groups that are involved in every part of the ballot initiative process to provide an attestation when they are associated for raising, collecting, or spending money to support or oppose legislation, which is the subject of a statewide ballot initiative or referendum, to disclose to the Secretary of State that they have not received funding from a foreign national, or that they're a pass-through at 100,000 or more. That's a basic sideboard to ensure legislation and the initiative process are not being influenced by foreign actors. As Representative Weber already noted, and she did a great job working with us in the walkthrough of the bill, prohibiting foreign nationals from influencing the initiative process is a growing concern around the country, and I was deeply disturbed by the influence of foreign actors in the constitutional initiative process in Ohio, which garnered some national attention. And as we just discussed, without belaboring the point, the media has often said that there's no foreign money, this never happens here, but we talked about the presence that the Center for Tech and Civic Life has been trying to get into Wyoming, and that was shown by their presence at this September 2024 meeting in Rock Springs. And we don't want this here. And so there's a proactive measure to set up these safeguards and saying that we're not going to have these donations from foreign nationals, we're not going to allow pass-throughs with some sideboards on foreign nationals, and that's what this bill gets at in closing the loophole for initiatives and referendums.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You bet. Any follow-up questions come up? Thank you. We're good. Let's hear if we got testimony in the room. Any testimony in the room? Ms. Russell, you coming up? Thanks. And then, Lily, do we have anybody online? Okay, thank you. We'll get them next. Ms. Russell, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, sorry about that. Kathy Russell, Wyoming Republican Party Executive Director. Addressing just some of the questions that came from here, the Federal Election Commission actually addresses the issue of foreign nationals. The reason why the definition is in the USC code is because this is an issue. There have been books written about it, reports by national security and intelligence agencies in the State Department. Federal law, first I want to preface this. There are very specific rules that go with PAC contributions, and they have to segregate it. And in fact, we know that these bad actors are here, and we know that one of the biggest players on an international level to interfere, not just here, but around the world, has a residence in Wyoming. And in fact, in the books that they have written about their activities, it's treated as a board game. And so this is a big issue. In FEC regulations, it says federal law prohibits contributions, donations, expenditures, and disbursements solicited, directed, received, or made directly or indirectly by or from foreign nationals in connection with any federal, state, or local election. It goes on to prohibit and includes advances of personal funds, contributions, or donations to political party committees, organizations, state or local party committees for the purchase of construction of a building. It goes on and on. And so there's quite an extensive one. What this does is follows the example of other states in getting it codified and recognizing that it can happen here, and we're going to prohibit it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any chance you could provide us with that reference?
Absolutely.
That'd be great if you could.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Mine was more of a summary, so I'd like to know more. Questions for Ms. Russell? Senator Dockstader.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Russell, what did you mean by when you referenced playing it like a board game? What do you mean by that?
Ms. Russell?
Actually, George Soros actually has, in interviews, said that he likes doing it. He likes making countries fall. He's been prohibited from participating or even entering certain countries because of the way he treats it. And the most famous of all of them is the way he collapsed the Bank of England. That was a huge impact. And he actually talks about how fun it is to do.
Thank you. I'll have to look into that. Anybody else? Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Russell. Anybody else in the room? Let's go online. I'm sorry, could you say your name, sir? Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Case and members of the committee. My name is Nathaniel Surslev. I appear today on behalf of Americans for Public Trust, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to uncover and publicize outside money and influence in politics and policy. I thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 337. Legislation which protects Wyoming from foreign meddling is a notable and worthy pursuit. Just last year, a Chinese-backed cryptocurrency mining firm was forced to sell land near a Wyoming nuclear missile base amidst national security concerns. Following that instance, you quickly acted to pass legislation to allow state investigations of foreign-owned land transactions. And again, more recently, the traction on legislation to ensure that only U.S. citizens are voting in U.S. elections has been equally commendable. These are simple, common-sense measures to protect Wyoming from foreign interference, and HB 337 is no different. While there is a federal ban on foreign nationals influencing elections, foreign nationals are still able to exploit loopholes on the state and federal level, thereby allowing foreign money to flow into politics. Currently, there is no federal or Wyoming prohibition on foreign nationals contributing to organizations that spend on ballot measures. These measures are an important method that give the people of Wyoming a voice in the political process, and we need to make sure that they are free from foreign influence. Right now, there is a foreign-funded group based in Washington, D.C. called the 1630 Fund, and they are actively bankrolling ballot measures across the country. APT has been able to trace that the 1630 Fund has received at least $250 million from a foreign national and has turned around and poured $130 million of that money into ballot issue campaigns in 25 states. This foreign-backed money has made its way into neighboring states as well, including Montana, Colorado, and Nebraska. And Wyoming could be next if the loophole is not closed. The foreign national I speak of is named Hans-Jörg Wyss. He is a Swiss billionaire whose stated goal is to reinterpret the American Constitution in the light of progressive politics. And his political activism is channeled through a daisy chain of opaque organizations that mask the ultimate recipients of his money. When he's not in Switzerland, he keeps a home in Wilson, Wyoming. From this palatial estate, he uses his vast wealth to meddle behind the scenes in American politics, even going so far as to boast that he could exert an influence through his foundation. Wyoming should act quickly to close this foreign influence loophole before Mr. Wyss or other foreign actors work to exert an influence in your state. I respectfully urge you to support House Bill 337. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you. And would you spell your name for us? I'm so sorry.
Yes, sir. It's Nathaniel, Nathaniel. Last name is Surslev, Serslev as in Victor.
Okay, and are you in Washington, D.C.?
I'm based out of Alexandria, Virginia, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Questions for Mr. Surslev? How'd I do in the name?
You nailed it, sir.
Okay, questions for Mr. Surslev? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. You know, I know we've mentioned people that are residents of Wyoming and people by name. It's not exactly improper in the committee's session, but I am acutely aware that no one is here to defend them. So we'll just leave it hanging at that. And we appreciate your testimony, Mr. Surslev. Thank you. All right, who else is online? 3 times in one day. Ms. Doyer, welcome from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman Case, members of the committee. 3rd time's a charm. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 337. This is a ban on foreign funding in ballot initiative and referendum campaigns in the state of Wyoming. As we've mentioned, this is not a hypothetical concern. In states across the country, millions of dollars in foreign-tied funds have been spent to influence the outcome of state ballot measures and legislatively referred constitutional amendments. Research by the watchdog group Americans for Public Trust has tied millions of those dollars to that Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Wyss. Those were poured into ballot measures that were used to advance liberal causes in several states. Other states have witnessed the danger of delay in protecting against foreign influence. You heard Secretary Gray mention Ohio earlier. Ohio passed a law banning foreign funding in ballot measures, but not before that 1630 fund poured more than $20 million into the state in advance of an election. Prior to 2023, the 1630 fund had spent very little, and suddenly the money flooded in. Decisions as significant as amending the Constitution belong exclusively in the hands of this country, the citizens of this country, and voters of that particular state. While federal law has banned foreign nationals from donating to candidates and super PACs, the FEC has interpreted that elections does not apply to ballot measure elections. So there is a loophole that exists at the federal level that they're trying to close, but states can take action and be proactive to close the loophole as well. It is worth noting that while we've zeroed in on spending tied to someone like Hans-Jörg Wyss, nothing is stopping foreign powers like China or Russia from doing the same. In fact, research has recently showed money tied to China flowing into U.S. environmental nonprofits with a pattern of giving very similar to Wyss's own giving to the left-wing political groups like 1630 Fund. Effective legislation banning foreign funding will address a few key areas without violating donor privacy and upholding the free speech rights of American citizens. States must act to ban both direct and indirect foreign contributions to these campaigns. This ban should be designed to prevent groups from laundering large sums of foreign money into campaigns by accepting and using foreign donations for other purposes that free up resources for contributions to ballot measures. A clear way to accomplish this is how House Bill 337 is structured, which requires donors to certify they have not received more than a certain amount, which we have a $100,000 threshold, over a period of time prior to the contribution. The way this bill does, you will have a limit in terms of time as well as money. These protections should also be applied to independent expenditures to avoid creating a loophole and simply shifting funding to a different arena. Finally, this should apply to foreign nationals. It is not enough to simply apply it to foreign governments or political parties. Foreign meddling is toxic no matter whether it originates from the Chinese government or a foreign activist. This bill passed the Wyoming House with overwhelming and bipartisan support, and I encourage you to advance it and protect Wyoming elections from foreign interference. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Doyer. Any questions for Ms. Doyer? Senator Landon.
So, Ms. Doyer, thank you very much for your testimony. You mentioned super PACs. Where can we find the definition of, where are the lines drawn on super PACs? Like, for example, is your organization considered a super PAC?
Ms. Doyer?
Mr. Chairman, to the Senator, no, sir, we are a nonprofit organization. We do not contribute to campaigns. And we would refer to the definitions that are in the United States Code regarding what constitutes a super PAC.
Just one more follow-up.
Please.
So, Mr. Chairman, went home over the weekend. I live in the center part of the state, and there were hundreds and hundreds of postcards sent out from an organization in Texas. And I'm wondering if that's super PACs doing that, or, you know, who, I don't recall. Was that your group, Brandon?
Did you have a mailing this weekend?
Just curious. Did you just send out a mailing to us over the weekend? I'm just curious.
Mr. Chairman, to the Senator, no, sir, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking at the language about the $100,000. And that seems like it's only part of the attestation here. Love that word. Secretary Gray taught me that word. It says on line 21 or 20, it says, before accepting the contribution, the group shall obtain information from the donor that the donor is not a foreign national. So that's number one. And that the donor has not knowingly accepted, whether directly or indirectly, more than $100,000 in aggregate from a prohibited source. So I think that's what, I assume this is being done in other states. Ms. Doyer, can you maybe help us with that? Seems to me that that's saying the donor is not a foreign national, and the donor has to also ascertain or attest that it didn't receive more than $100,000 from a prohibited person. So I got that right? So the donor's not prohibited, but they also, from their donor base, didn't receive it. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So it's prohibiting, basically making sure that the campaign is saying to the donor, can you affirm for me that you are not a foreign national and that you have not received money from a prohibited source, a foreign national, within that 4-year time frame, and that it doesn't go over the $100,000 threshold. We're not looking for the inadvertent, $5 that gets passed around on a collection plate and it somehow ends up in used type of campaign. It's the people who are using these large sums of money to influence state constitutions.
Okay, and Ms. Doyer, I think if you probably were listening when we were talking to the secretary before, and I was asking questions about an industry group participating in a political action committee. I mean, I think the political action committee, this section could be relevant to that circumstance under the right contrivance of the facts, where the donor is actually not a foreign national, even though the donor received $99,000 in money from a foreign national that they didn't pass through. You see what I'm saying? I think that's at least a possibility. Ms. Doyer, is that right?
So, Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure I have the right hypothetical. I did have to step away for just a moment. So there was an industry organization that was involved in a ballot measure contribution, and there was a question about whether one of their donors had been receiving money in the amount of 900. Okay, so I think in that circumstance, they would be filling out that attestation, but they're not going to be necessarily prohibited because it doesn't hit that $100,000 threshold.
And the person that's got the money the second time around is not a foreign national.
The
So,
pass-through organization, yes, that's correct.
okay, I think I get it now. All right, thank you, Ms. Doyer. I want to make sure, committee, anything else for Ms. Doyer? Thank you very much. All right, anything else online? Anybody else? Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Committee? Okay, I got a motion by Boner. Discussion? Senator Landon?
So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I know there's irritation when we talk about these bills, but we have to care about what's inside of them, not just the title. We like to drill down and make sure, is there any unintended consequences here? What does this mean if and but? I've still got a question in my mind, whether or not we govern nonprofits, for example. I think that's a good question to ask. Do they accept any international money? I'm just curious. For whatever cause. We're just touching on one little sliver of things. But anyway, just thinking out loud with you. That's all.
Okay, anybody else? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I do think that you've hit the nail on the head. We're drilling down on a specific point that is a loophole, the ballot and referendum process, and whether we're going to allow foreign nationals to meddle in that, or whether we'll keep the sovereignty for our citizens in our state.
Anybody else? Senator Boner.
Yeah, discussion about nonprofits, it's my understanding that they wouldn't be a nonprofit if they're engaged in electioneering. Is that correct? Or, I mean, that's against the rules, isn't it?
I think they could form a PAC.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so they move money and they create a PAC. I don't think they're prohibited from giving to a PAC or encouraging their members to give to a PAC. I think that's usually the way that happens, that you can't spend money without a reporting organization, which would be a PAC. At least that's the way I'm thinking of it. But it would be pretty easy for XYZ Environmental Group to create XYZ PAC. And Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand we have to take these things serious, but there's all sorts of innuendos of nefarious action, but I don't know that we know that. If I stand with the bill, I'd probably go from the standpoint of preemptive. I've heard that several times tonight, word preemptive safeguards. But I don't know that we're at the point that all these things are happening in our state. If I ultimately go with it, it'll be from the preemptive measure, from the preemptive attitude.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, we usually try to discourage the disparagement of any actors or individuals. We're usually really careful about it. Just kind of it's a permitted in committee to use proper names, but there was no opportunity for those people to defend their actions. I'll just point that out. And maybe we'll hear from them. The other problem is that ballot initiatives are really difficult in Wyoming, more difficult than any other state proportionally. So, but I'm keen. We've got a motion on the bill. Are there any proposed amendments? Any proposed amendments? Let's call the roll on the bill.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 337 prohibiting foreign funding of ballot measures. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstader.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
I noticed for these grumpy committee members, they all vote aye. I'll vote aye. Vote aye.
Sorry, aye. You have 5 ayes.
Well, the greatest thing is that we are done with bills. And so Senator Steinmetz, let's see, are you on this bill? No, I'm not. There's nobody on this bill.
3 would make the right for.
Yeah, that would be great, Representative. Sometimes when you ask someone that doesn't really know the bill, the committee members here know the bill. So if you could find one of the committee members that might be better for you, and they might be willing to volunteer, especially the two that made the motion. And I understand Senator Steinmetz is getting really loaded up with House bills. So I don't know if Senator Boner will do it or not. Perhaps one of the, yeah, it would be a good choice, but we'll make it work no matter what you come up with. All right? All right, we're all done with House bills, Senator Landon?
So, Mr. Chairman, if you're afraid that you're going to go into DTs or something tomorrow, we have an election bill in front of travel, recreation, and wild. First thing tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, we're going to take up another election bill if you'd like to join us.
I'll be there.
You're sure? This guy will be in there, yeah.
We're not totally in the clear because on Friday, we're going to have a confirmation hearing for Chris Petrie here at 8:30. And then we're going to meet with our House counterparts at, I think, 12:30. Yeah, so for interim topics. So you might peruse those interim topics too. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, committee. You've been a great